Hello and welcome to our latest Ask an Expert series here on the EEA's Facebook page. You're joining us live here. We are discussing how clean is Europe's air today. My name is Constant Brand. I'm from the EEA press office. And joining us today for a discussion on air quality or air pollution is Cristina Guerreiro from the Norwegian Institute for Air Research in Oslo, and also Alberto Gonzalez, EEA air quality expert in Copenhagen. Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome everybody. Just before we start, I'll just introduce our two panelists today. But if you have any comments or questions on air quality, air pollution, do post them on our Facebook feed below in the comment section right under here. And we will definitely make sure our panelists today, our experts today, will get to them later on in our discussion. Alberto, let me start with you. We just released our EEA annual air quality report a few weeks ago. What are its main findings this year, and what for you stands out this year?
Well, what we have found this year is that, as we also saw in the past, air quality in Europe has been improving during the last decades, and this is because we emit less pollutants. That means that we put into the atmosphere fewer pollutants from our activities, and this translates in the concentrations that we measure at the monitoring stations, the levels of air pollution. That is also the levels that we breathe have decreased, and this has also entailed fewer impacts and fewer deaths, which is the impact that we measure year after year. So the positive message is that we are improving. The not so positive message is that we still have to improve further.
Mm-hmm. What do you say are the main risks that people still face across Europe when it comes to air pollution?
Well, we have here to distinguish between different pollutants, because depending on the region, we also have certain pollutants that are more prominent than others. What we do is we analyze the pollutants that are regulated under the European legislation. So we focus mainly on three pollutants, which are fine particles. And in this case, we have the highest levels in Eastern Europe. And this is due to the fact that in this part in this region of our continent, the fuel used for heating our households is like coal or wood, and it's like a non-very clean fuel, and also the fuel used for industry activities. Then we have another pollutant, which is nitrogen dioxide, which comes mainly from traffic, and this is a main problem in big cities where a high population density is, and also when we have more traffic cities. So it's like the big cities all across the continent. And finally, we have ozone, which is a pollutant which is not emitted directly into the atmosphere, but is formed there in the presence of sunlight and high temperatures. And in this case, we see a clear gradient from north to south, and we see the highest concentrations in Southern Europe. So depending on where we are, maybe we have to focus more on one pollutant or another. And depending on the pollutants, we also have to focus on the sources from which these pollutants come from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you talked a bit about the sources, but can you say a bit about how air pollution impacts us humans and maybe even the wider environment per se? Who and where? I mean, in the report we talk about 400 premature deaths. We'll get to that a little bit later perhaps, but if you can start with that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, pollutants, they are released into the atmosphere, they stay there, let's say, and they get into our body through the air we breathe. So the important thing here is that everybody has to breathe. We cannot decide not to breathe. Yeah. So in principle, everybody is affected everywhere, all the time, because we have to breathe constantly. So it's true that there are also specific groups of population that are more vulnerable to exposure to air pollutants, and that means that when they are exposed to the same amount as other people, they are more affected. And in this case, we have especially children, the elderly, or people with pre-existing conditions that can be aggravated by the pollutants, and how it affects our health. But well, when we breathe these pollutants, they come into our lung, then come into the blood, and then reach all the organs in our body. And basically, through inflammation processes, they affect all these organs, and they produce mainly cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases, and cancer. And in some cases, these diseases lead to deaths.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let me just jump to Cristina here. We'll get back to the premature deaths a bit more as well, also within the context of the wider European and maybe even the Norwegian context. Cristina, what specifically do you work on, and how does that work feed into the European view of air pollution?
So, I mean, myself, I've been working on air quality for 26 years, and my institute also was funded to look at air quality and air pollution issues, because Norway 50 years ago was confronted with long transport of air pollution that was causing acidification in its ecosystems and lakes. The fish was dying, and the woods and the trees were also dying from acidification. And so this was the start of the research in this field, and we actually have been supporting the European Environmental Agency from its birth 26 years ago on issues of air pollution and air quality assessment. So we're very happy with this cooperation, and we think this is a really important topic.
Okay. Yeah, if I may add, I'm very happy also to have Cristina here today with us, because she's the co-author, one of the co-authors of the report we published some weeks ago. So I think this is a very good opportunity to also highlight their work and our cooperation. Yeah, sorry.
No problem, no problem. So how do you work together in practical terms? Run through how an annual report is put together.
Actually, it's very, very cooperative work, Alberto.
Yeah.
I mean, the year before, we decide on the main content of the report and the focus, and we plan the work for next year. We often build on assessments we've been doing. This year, we worked on the COVID chapter that was actually not planned last year. Nobody knew last year we would have a COVID situation. So we really put our time and our heads together to see what can we do to also address the issue of COVID and air quality. And we work very, very closely together. This whole internet Teams cooperation that we see under COVID, this is something we've developed actually for a long time with EEA, not new to us. Alberto?
Okay. Yeah, and actually we have an agreement, a contract with Cristina and some other partners and other research institutions under what we call the European Topic Center. So every year we decide on several products to develop together, and we count on their expertise and their scientific insight and research for, as Cristina said, many years. So we decide on this joint program, and when it comes to the air quality report, as Cristina said, we decide mainly on the content, and we decide who writes what, and as she said, also we use a specific products or reports or work that we have been doing in the immediate past, because we want always to be the most updated possible.
Okay, so the data is collected on member state level of the EEA or also at regional level. Cristina, maybe you can explain how this data is gathered in Norway and then sent to the EEA.
Yeah, I mean, there is European legislation that requests all the countries to report to the EEA on air quality. So the countries have to set up their own monitoring networks, and this is different from country to country. So in Norway, the state delegates on the municipalities the responsibility for part of the monitoring, and on the road authorities and industrial parks on other part of the monitoring. And this data is gathered actually at NILU, at my institute. We developed a database and do the quality control and quality assurance of all this data and monitoring across the country. And then we report also this data to the EEA. That's from the national perspective. Then in our work to support the EEA, we also support the EEA on the report from other countries. So all the countries send this information to the EEA, and we support the EEA in looking at the data quality, developing the systems to receive all the data, and then finally doing the assessment on this data that ultimately is published on this report you mentioned.
And that's within the framework, the umbrella of the European Topic Center.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Just perhaps, I mean, a lot of viewers might think, oh, Norway, air pollution, they don't really go together. You've got beautiful fjords, pristine wildlife, and electric cars, as we all heard about. What's the situation in Norway like?
Well, it has also been improving considerably. I mean, we're a long way away from the scenario I talked about 50 years ago, where the fish was dying because the lakes and the nature was acidifying. A lot has been done in Europe, and that also impacts in improving the air quality in Norway, because air pollution is not a problem that knows boundaries. It's transported along many thousand kilometers of distance, and it's also formed, as Alberto said, in the atmosphere, but due to emissions. We still have some issues also in Norway. So we still have issues, especially in the winter, related with the wood combustion to heat houses with wood in small stoves. And we also have issues related to, especially to pollution from traffic. But that also, as you mentioned, is improving thanks to the transition to electrification of the transport sector, and also thanks to legislation from the European Commission and European Union targeting emissions from vehicles, so combustion, diesel and gasoline vehicles that have much tougher requirements in terms of emissions than they had decades ago. So I mean, Norway, like the rest of Europe, is improving. And yes, Norway has lower levels of pollution in general than the average European country, but we have challenge. And certainly in winter, we note bad air quality in our city especially.
Okay, and maybe Alberto, you can quickly, before I get to you on the winter aspect, because I found that very interesting, maybe your viewers too. If you have questions or comments, please post them down below, and we'll make sure that our panelists see them. Alberto, what is the situation with air quality, air pollution in winter? How does that work?
Well, in winter, what we have is that the atmosphere. Well, because we have been talking so far on the air pollutants and the emissions and how the concentrations affect us, but we have to take into account meteorology, the meteorological conditions. We are talking about atmosphere, so whatever happens in the atmosphere is very much impacted or influenced by meteorology. So once the pollutants are released into the atmosphere, they travel, they are deposited through rain, for instance, in the lakes. That's what, for instance, what we saw in the past, this issue with the fish dying because the pollution transported from other areas were deposited into the lakes or the rivers. The pollutants also interact with each other to form new pollutants, for instance. So what happens in winter is that normally we have very stable meteorological situations. That means that we don't have very windy situations. We have a stable, so the pollutants cannot mix and cannot disperse easily. And also we have increased emissions of, for instance, this residential heating. So as in Norway, we burn more fuels, more wood, more coal to heat our households, but not only our households, to heat schools, to heal in any kind of buildings.
I see.
So we have an increase of the emissions. That means an increase of the pollutants we put in the atmosphere, and we have worse conditions for these pollutants to disappear, let's say, from the atmosphere. So that's why in some cases, and for some pollutants, winter is when we have higher concentrations. But on the contrary, for instance, for ozone, as I was mentioning at the beginning, which is formed in the presence of high temperatures and sunlight, we have higher concentrations in summer.
Okay. And some people might be thinking, okay, we've had the COVID pandemic, we've had lockdown measures, we've had a lot less cars on the street, we've had a lot less people traveling from work or to commuting to work. What impact has the COVID pandemic had on air pollution? We can address this both at the European level, and maybe also it'll be interesting to see what happened in Norway specifically.
Well, as you said, due to these lockdown restrictions, most of countries implemented in spring, the economic activity stopped or decreased, and specifically, as you mentioned, traffic. Because I mean, we stayed home, so we didn't travel to work, we didn't travel for leisure activities or whatever. So the emissions decreased, and that's why also the concentrations decreased. And we have made a study, as Cristina was mentioning before. We devoted a specific chapter in this year's air quality report to the COVID situation and the impact of these lockdown measures on the concentrations. And we have seen that in general, in Europe, we have seen a decrease of the concentrations during this lockdown period. And especially for nitrogen dioxide that I was mentioning before, comes mainly from the traffic. So traffic, let's say, and transport in general, also aviation, was the sector most affected by these measures. So it was where the activity decreased most. So we see a decrease in the concentrations of up to 70% in some cases from what we would have been expected if no lockdown measures would have been in place. And then we also see a decrease for particulate matter, but in this case, particulate matter has several sources. So it comes from traffic, but it also comes from industry. It comes also from this residential heating we were talking. And in these sectors, the activity was not reduced as much as for traffic, and in some cases, we suspect that it even increased, as for instance, I mean, because the lockdown happened still in winter, early spring, so we still had to use heating. So the emissions of this sector didn't decrease as much. So just to summarize this long explanation, we have seen a decrease mainly in general all over Europe. It's true also that we have seen the differences among countries and among cities. We have to bear in mind that the restrictions were not the same in all countries, but we see a general decrease in the nitrogen dioxide, which is this pollutant linked to traffic, and also in particulate matter, but not as clear as for nitrogen dioxide.
Okay, I'm going to get to, we've got loads of questions coming in, but I just wanted to hear from Cristina quickly what the situation in Norway was with COVID.
It's quite similar. We saw a very clear reduction, especially close to traffic. So traffic stations registered a very considerable reduction in nitrogen dioxide and particles. And it's more of a question mark on the particulate matter, especially related to the fact that if wood combustion increases because people are more home, there might be some increases some places.
Yeah. Okay, great. Again, if you have questions, please jot them down. We're going to go through some questions now. From Todd, how many people die from pollution, and how can I know if the air where I live is clean or polluted? Good question. Who would like to?
Well, I can start. I mean, the latest estimates published in this report we are talking about 400,000 deaths per year in Europe due to exposure to fine particles. So, and I think this is a figure that talks by itself, and it's quite impressive, and this is calling for action. So when it comes to know how the situation in your specific area is, you have, of course, maybe your local or national institutions providing information. But we also have the European Environment Agency that collect, as Cristina was explaining, data from all the European countries, from our member countries, but also from some cooperating, and some countries that report data.
How many countries in total? How many countries in total?
Above 40.
Okay. Wow.
Because I mean, the member countries of the European Environment Agency are 38, but we also receive data from United Kingdom. We receive data from Andorra, from Ukraine, from Georgia. So all in all, we have like around 40 countries. So the good thing is that we added this European and overall value to the data. So you can see data, you can compare data from country to country. We also provide information maybe more accessible to the public in the form of an index. So we collect data from all these pollutants and we translate this in an index that is more easily understandable for people that may be not aware of the specific pollutants. So on one side, you have your local and national source of information, and then you have the European one.
Yeah, and we have the European Air Quality Index. My colleagues can put the link in our feed down below, so you can have a quick look. Another question, maybe Cristina, you can tackle this one. How can we tackle the issue of residential wood burning, which is the main source of particulate matter in many member states? From Jean-Luc Caruna.
Thank you for the question. This is a really important issue, and maybe one the public in general can act upon more promptly. So, I mean, the short answer is move away from wood burning if possible, but this is not so easy, and there's also climate considerations to take into account here. So using very dry wood would significantly reduce emissions of particulate matter. In lightning from the top rather than from the bottom also significantly reduce emissions. Opening air and also using newer technologies of ovens, of stoves, where you have two chambers for the combustion, that also significantly reduces emissions. But it's a problem, like Alberto said, that in very cold winters, when it's very cold and the air is very stable, that's typically when people light their stoves. That's the worst period in terms of generating air pollution. And therefore, finding other insulating houses, maybe using more electricity in some cases, and combining with heat pumps and so on would be a much better way of going forward into more sustainable solutions.
Mm-hmm. Good. I have a good follow-up question. I just want to get to as many questions as we can. Again, if you have a question or comment, please post them down below. We are racing to get them in here. Should we be more concerned about indoor or outdoor air quality? A question from Amy. I think that sort of good follow-up to the last point.
Both are really important, and we are more and more indoors, actually 90 to 95% of our time indoors, and there are many sources of air pollution indoors. Wood stoves is a very significant one, of course, cooking and so on too, and another one, others are related to the types of things we have in house and chemicals that are released, for example, from furniture, sofas, etc. This is to some extent regulated by legislation, but it's also important moving forward to be aware of painting and all these issues that might impact on indoor air pollution. And then good ventilation is key. And of course, outdoor air pollution will always get indoors. So we need to tackle both problems simultaneously.
Just quickly, a lot of people are burning candles. It's that time of year. Good or bad?
It's
very bad.
Air pollution.
Very bad.
There's a lot of
So what do we do?
now. There's a lot of good alternatives with nice candles that look like they're burning, but they're not really burning. So
yeah, we have all
Okay.
these electric candles that I'm using at least also.
Good. Another question from Ana Maria Cotrica. Thank you for the event. What are the levels of air pollutants in Europe compared to other parts of the world, like China or South America? Good question. How do we compare?
Well, if I may start, we in Europe, together with North America, have the best air quality in the world. But in any case, I would like to highlight, as I said before, that even if we well, we have also regional differences. So, but when considering Europe as a whole, we can say that we are the lucky ones together with North America. But as I said, this is not enough. This doesn't mean that it's ideal, or it doesn't mean that it cannot be improved. So we are in the good side, but we can we could be better. So that's also what we need to go on with these events and to go on informing people, and so they can take also decisions and to improve all on our own side and our own role.
And I guess the WHO carries some work on this as well, with comparisons on the global level.
Yeah, the World Health Organization has a global data set where they collect available information on concentrations of pollutants. I would like also to say that the most well-established network for measure pollutants is also established in North America, Europe, and in some parts of Asia. So we are also maybe the ones who have like better information on what's going on in terms of air pollution.
Okay, thank you. Matt has a question. Will climate change influence the impacts of air pollutants to environment or health? Cristina, you want to take that one?
Yes, and the two are connected, climate change and air pollution. So for example, when Alberto mentioned the ozone, which is an important air pollutant that is formed in the air, it depends on meteorology, and actually the development, that's the one pollutant that seems to get worse in Europe, and to a large extent it's because of climate change, because the weather is getting warmer, you get more formation of ozone. There's many relationships between climate and air pollution, and it's very complex, but we need to solve both the problem of climate and air quality hand in hand, and find actions, and there are plenty of them, like efficiency gains with energy and so on, and turning to renewable energies to really tackle the two problems at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question from a couple of questions on Thurstor. What are your thoughts about the large number of allowed exceedances of the health limit, 50 micrograms per cubic meter to 24 H average? Should an exceedance be counted as multiples of the health limit?
Well, I mean, this is related. Yeah, well, the question refers to the standard, to the legal standard set by the European legislation that are based on the recommendations by the World Health Organization, but also take into account other considerations like technical feasibility, economical feasibility, and at the end are also an agreement between among all the countries in the European Union. Next year, the World Health Organization will issue new recommendations, and also the European Commission is planning to align the legal standards in the European legislation more with these recommendations from the World Health Organization. So we know that the World Health Organization recommendations are stricter than the legal standards in the European Union, and we also highlight this in our reports, and we make the comparison with both standards. So we are also helping to move towards these World Health Organization recommendations. But as I said, next year can be like a new point in time when we will have these new recommendations from the World Health Organization and this objective of the European Union to move closer to them.
Okay, I have a quick follow-up from Matt here, referring to emissions through stack. This is very technical here. Anybody want to?
What's the question in particular? I mean, exactly.
Climate change. I think it's climate change. No, do you have the estimate of external costs? What you were talking about?
Oh, actually, this is something we are working with in the European Topic Center together with European Environmental Agency, of understanding what are the external costs of emissions from industrial sources in Europe, in terms of health impacts, in terms of ecological impacts. So this is a hot topic in terms of our research and our work today, but a lot has been done to tackle emissions from industrial sources in Europe. There is still some way to go, especially in Central Eastern Europe, that came into this legislation much later than all the other countries in Western Europe, but we are progressing in that regard.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, but what about aviation? Is that part of the transport emissions, or what impact does aviation have? Obviously, it's a lot less now than it was before the pandemic, but.
Yeah, well, I can start, and also maybe Cristina can complement. The thing with aviation, and when we count for the emissions, and this is done at the national level, when we count for the emissions from each country, the thing is that sometimes when we have, for instance, international aviation and the airplane are in the sky, we don't. Where should we assign these emissions? And the thing is also, most emissions from aviation happen very high. So while the pollutants affecting most the human health are those emitted close to where we are. So in the case of aviation, it's maybe landing and taking off, and the taxiing in the airport. But of course, aviation is one of the sectors that have been regulated latest, together with shipping, and is one of the sectors where still a lot can be done. Also because it has great impact on climate change. Because as I said, the emissions happen mainly in the high atmosphere, and then that's where the effect of climate change is more evident.
Okay. Cristina, anything to add quickly, Cristina?
Yeah, just quickly. So we consider these emissions in our modeling efforts, looking both at air quality, both at the troposphere, so where we are and breathe, but also higher up in the atmosphere, and to consider this, how do they contribute to the chemistry, both in terms of impacts on climate change and also air quality closer to the ground. But as Alberto said, emissions on the ground are the most important.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Alberto and Cristina, and also to our viewers taking the time to join our discussion today. There will be more. We didn't reach all the points of obviously that are involved in air pollution, but there'll be another opportunity in the future to address this issue. Thanks for watching today, and we'll definitely see you next time. Bye.